For the better part of a century, the entire world's financial system has played by one simple rule. The US dollar is king. But what if that's all starting to change? Today, we're diving into the story of the fragmenting dollar. And believe me, it's a shift that could literally reshape the global economy as we know it.
I mean, you see the headlines everywhere, right? It's the question on everyone's mind, fueling all kinds of speculation. Is the dollar's reign finally over? Is a massive collapse just around the corner?
Well, let's just get this out of the way. The short answer? No. But the long answer? The real story? Oh, that's way more interesting and honestly, a lot more important. It's not about a collapse. It's about a quiet, fundamental rewiring of the entire system.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we have to look at the numbers. And this is where it gets tricky because the data seems to be telling two completely different stories at the exact same time. So on one hand, you look at this and the dollar's dominance looks totally secure. I mean, it still makes up almost 57% of all global foreign exchange reserves. That is nearly 3 times bigger than its closest competitor, the euro. From this angle, yeah, it looks untouchable. But, and this is a big but, if you just zoom out a little bit, the picture completely changes. What we see is this slow, steady, but absolutely undeniable decline from its peak of 72% back in 2001. So yeah, it's still the king, but the trend line is clear. The world is slowly but surely chipping away at its total reliance on the dollar. And that right there is the real story, fragmentation.
So what happened? What was the trigger that turned this kind of slow, gradual shift into a top priority for some of the biggest economies on the planet? Well, it all goes back to one single event that changed everything.
The turning point was February 2022, right after the invasion of Ukraine. The US and its allies did something that had never been done on this scale before. They froze Russia's access to its own money, its sovereign assets, held in Western banks. $300 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second. This wasn't just a policy move, it was a shockwave that went through every central bank on Earth. It was the clearest possible demonstration of what people now call the weaponization of finance. And this quote right here just nails it. This is the lesson the rest of the world learned, basically overnight. All of a sudden, holding dollars wasn't just a smart financial move, it was a massive political risk. Your country's nest egg wasn't safe, it was a bargaining chip in somebody else's foreign policy. So this new reality, it forced a lot of countries to rethink everything. Let's look at the key players here, the main architects of this new alternative system. And it's really important to remember, they're not some unified team. They're all just pursuing their own self-interest. Okay, first up is China, and they are by far the most ambitious player in this game. They're not just talking about an alternative, they are actively building a parallel universe for finance. Their CIPS payment system is a direct challenger to SWIFT. Their trade in yuan is booming, and they're cutting deals left and right to just bypass the dollar completely. Then you've got Russia and India, who are taking very different but equally pragmatic approaches. Russia, well, they were basically kicked out of the dollar club, so they had no choice but to de-dollarize their trade with China. India, on the other hand, is playing a much more clever strategic game, creating these little bilateral options for rupee-based trade with dozens of countries. They're kind of working the edges without leaving the system entirely. And finally, two absolute giants in the commodities world. Brazil now settles its massive, nearly $200 billion trade with China using their own currencies. And then, in a move that is just dripping with symbolism, Saudi Arabia let a key deal that supported the petrodollar system expire, and then they went and joined a brand new non-dollar payment project. Okay, so we've seen the who and the why. But what's really fascinating is the how. We're moving beyond just talk and into the real world of financial plumbing. Let's look at the actual infrastructure, the new rails being laid down to get around the old system. So on one side, you've got the old system, SWIFT. Think of it like a messenger service for banks. It doesn't actually move the money, it just sends the payment instructions, and most of those instructions have to pass through the US banking system. Now China's CIPS, it's designed to be both the messenger and the delivery truck, settling the whole deal directly in yuan. But honestly, mBridge is where things get really wild. This is a whole new level. It allows multiple central banks to trade directly with each other, instantly, using their own digital currencies on one shared platform. A transaction that used to take days and multiple middlemen is now over in seconds. It's a brand new direct highway for global money, completely bypassing the old toll roads.
So, okay, we've looked at the trigger, the main players, and the new tech. Let's circle back to that big question from the beginning. This isn't a story about collapse. It's a story about something much more subtle, but maybe even more consequential: fragmentation.
Now, let's be super clear here. The dollar is not going anywhere overnight. Its strengths are enormous. You've got the insane size and depth of US markets. There's simply nowhere else to park trillions of dollars. You've got an open system where money can flow freely, which is not the case with the yuan. You have decades of trust built up in the US legal system, and the biggest one of all, network effects. Everybody uses it. Because everybody uses it, no other currency is even in the same league.
And that brings us to what might be the single most important idea in this whole story, summed up perfectly right here. The goal isn't to replace the dollar. The goal is to build an exit option, because the moment you have a credible way to walk away from the table, the whole power dynamic changes.
So what does having an exit option really threaten? It threatens this: coercive leverage. It's a fancy term for a simple, incredibly powerful idea: the ability to influence another country because they need your financial system to survive. It's the power to cut a nation off from the world economy without firing a single bullet. That is real power. And so every single one of these new payment rails we've talked about, every bilateral deal, every transaction that avoids the dollar, it's like a tiny crack in that foundation of power. It might not seem like much on its own, but over time, all those cracks add up. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at what central banks are actually doing. Look at gold. Their holdings have more than doubled as a share of reserves since 2015. Why? It's simple. Gold is neutral. It's an asset you can hold that can't be frozen with the stroke of a pen. So if you remember one thing from this entire breakdown, let it be this: the world isn't finding a new dollar to replace the old one. The world is hedging its bets. It's building a future with options beyond the dollar. And that leaves us with one final and pretty heavy thought. The rules for how money moves around the planet for the next half-century, they are being rewritten right now as we speak. So the real question is, who's holding the pen?